This is Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Mark. And today's guest was a gift, and I mean that in a variety of ways. Of course, his music is a gift. This conversation was a gift. But even connecting him was a gift for which I have to thank Jeremy Toback. Jeremy suggested I listen to Shane's music. When I did, he connected us. Unfortunately, I put the interview date in the wrong month in my calendar, and we had to reschedule for the next day. So that meant I needed a crash course in all things Shane Alexander. So my guest today is Shane Alexander. Shane talks about how his less than ideal childhood has been a driving force in his art, and how that seems to be the case for a lot of creative people. He also tells me how important late 80s metal is, and how he is his own harshest critic. Shane also discusses early bands and the unusual way one of them gave him seed money to start his solo career. It wasn't too long after that when he decided he had to be in control of his own musical destiny and the freedoms and problems of being self-managed. He couldn't stress enough how important it is to gain an understanding of the music business. Shane's latest album, Forever Songs, hasn't been out that long, and he's already finished writing his next. Go to ShaneAlexanderMusic.com to check out and buy his music. Follow him at Shane Alexander Music on socials. Follow us at Performance ANX. Get merch at performanceanx.threadless.com, or just send money to ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. I hope you enjoy this chat with Shane Alexander on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
This is Shane Alexander, and you're listening to the Performance Anxiety Podcast. No, I'll just promote you. Yeah.
All right. So I guess full disclosure to anybody listening, I did a crash course on you today because since I usually set like reminders like a week in advance and a couple days in advance so I can get started doing my research.
Right.
And since I put it in the wrong month, I was like, oh, okay. So I did a Shane Alexander crash course today. So if I get things wrong or in the wrong order, feel free to correct everything.
I'm not scared.
Excellent. I am a little bit. So I like starting at the beginning to figure out a little bit about how you got to where you are now. So what I like to find out is how was music a factor growing up? I mean, was there a lot of music in the household growing up? Did your parents have an interest in it? Did they play anything?
Well, yeah. My early years, my formative years, were fairly tumultuous, which I always think yields a songwriter or a performer, all the above. But basically, the short version is my parents met and were pregnant maybe the same day, and doomed to fail. And so my mom split when I was quite little, a toddler. And so I moved in with my grandparents, and I didn't even really realize this till many, many decades later, but the records that I had as a child, basically, I always say that music has been my whoopee since I was a child. I had the Beatles Yesterday 45 on vinyl in the house. I had Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel and Cat Stevens.
Oh,
and
wow.
Just really, really wonderful food groups, very young, single digits.
That's some pretty heavy stuff for a young kid.
Yeah, and it's funny again because I've become a singer-songwriter and I do a lot of often sort of moody music. But Yesterday is probably the pinnacle of all moody acoustic songs of all time.
Sure.
And it was funny because the flip side of that I remember was a song called "Act Naturally," which is I think an old country cover, and Ringo was singing, and that's a totally upbeat one.
Oh yeah,
but yeah. Music really just stepped in quite early, and I was really drawn to it. And I lived with my grandparents, and my grandma was sort of my surrogate mom.
Yeah.
And so in my early years, I was into like Simon and Garfunkel and Beatles and stuff. By the time I was 6 or 7, some neighborhood kids had turned me on to Kiss, which was also absolutely pivotal and huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
My father-in-law keeps trying to call in.
We can pause for a minute if you need to.
No, we're not being videoed, so I'll just text.
Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, the Kiss thing was very, very huge, and I really think designed for boys my age,
Yeah.
And so that was just really, really a big deal to me. And my father had remarried, and I had the proverbial wicked stepbrother, and I moved to Maryland and stuff. But when I would come home to visit my grandparents, I would listen to those records, and I like songs like The Boxer. A lot of Simon Garfunkel is really, really pivotal, I think, to my story, because it really was a friend to me when I was really young, and sort of, again, being an only child and just kind of left to my own devices with music, it really did just seep in. And so then, we moved to Maryland with my dad's second wife and her kids. And I think I was about 8 when he played the Black Sabbath Paranoid 8-track.
Oh, wow.
And I always, obviously they had a big farewell this week, which I watched all 9 hours of. But that was my sort of come to Jesus moment where I must guitar,
Right.
And so at 8 years old, I started begging for a guitar, and it took about 2 years, but I got my first guitar at 10.
Oh, wow.
So I was, teenage metalhead and total rocker and very disciplined about it. My only other passion at that time was I rode BMX and stuff, but music was really, really already a huge part of my identity, and I played in marching band and stuff too. But I just knew that it was going to sort of be my thing. And my dad's third wife came along, and she was a music teacher, and she was also a really lovely person. We're still really close.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she would smuggle home. There was a Fender Twin that belonged to she taught at a junior high school, and they had a Fender Twin that came home. And so, from basically throughout my teens, I would come home from school and go straight into guitar. And I was, things like Dio and Maiden and Judas Priest. There's countless of those records that I got so deep in, I could play them pretty much note for note,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that was a beautiful awakening. And then when my dad separated from his third wife, we moved to Pennsylvania. And so by then I'd already done a couple of like high school talent shows and just a few bands. I was 15, 16. Then when I came to Pennsylvania, I quickly put some bands together with the best and brightest I could find. Many of the people were literally twice my age.
Oh, man.
And, we had a big Battle of the Bands thing, and I had a band called Krankenstein, and we were doing covers, but we were doing very ambitious covers like Back in Black and Iron Maiden things and Queensryche stuff, and you had to really be able to sing and you had to really be able to play.
Yeah.
And so there were 3 or 4 bands on it, and we just destroyed. So I sort of had my comeuppance in my new town pretty quickly. By then, long-haired, fabulous, and there were a few other long-haired gunslingers in the town at the time. And so one of those became my best friend, and we went to 1 year of college and had the best time ever, played guitars and girls, and we bailed and we went to Los Angeles, and I went to GIT. I went to the Musicians Institute.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, when I was 18, going into 19. And so I was actually born in California, but I only lived here till I was maybe 2 months old. But so I sort of full circle came back in my late teens, and I've kind of been here ever since. And so in those early years after school, I was in a really fairly successful instrumental band, sort of something between like a Fish and a Pink Floyd. And I was kind of like the lead singer. Yeah, because as a guitarist, I was sort of like the voice. And so we were quite successful, and our keyboard player, I can say it now, was like drug dealer to the stars. And so he was flush with cash. So we had our own light rig, our own crew. And we were playing, my first gig ever, I think, with them was the Roxy. I played the Roxy and the Trube and the Whiskey, and Florentine Gardens was like 1,000 capacity. Back then, there were like rock clubs that often were like 1,000 capacity. And because there was such a scene, they were always full.
That's amazing.
So I caught the tail end of like that whole sort of 80s movement going into the 90s, where it was so vibrant. The Sunset Strip, I always say, like, between where the Whiskey A Go-Go is and where Gazzari's used to be. On any given Friday night, there were thousands of kids on the sidewalk. Long-haired guys passing out flyers, tight pants, big hair, pointy guitars.
Yeah.
And it was a really great time to be alive and in the mix.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. One of my favorite bands came from that area, and maybe you even saw them if you go to Gazzari's and all that. I loved Shark Island.
I remember their name, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure I was probably actually on bills with them. I totally remember them.
Oh, yeah. And I actually had the singer Richard Black was a guest on the podcast several years ago now. It was so
amazing.
That was awesome. Yeah. So I love that era of music. I mean, I know it tends to get a bad rap, especially from people my age and all. I'm in my early 50s now. And, when I broke into college, grunge had just broken on the East Coast. And so I was super into that. But before that, man, it was, like you said, Iron Maiden, but it was also... it was also sneaking in some of the hair metal. I never got into like Poison, but Motley Crue. I love Motley Crue. So
yeah, Ozzy, Randy Rhoads was another important touchstone. I mean, the first thing I ever learned on guitar was Smoke on the Water. I mentioned my stepmother. She was really wonderful. She taught me that the day I got my guitar, just the one finger, 035, 0365, 035, 0353 open. Yeah. And, of course, I've taught that to a million kids since. But yeah, when we came to LA, we were just, young and pretty and fabulous and had virtually no game plan. But at music school, I really did apply myself. And to this day, I can't read. I basically would memorize everything that was sight reading. And I think I only got 1B the whole year. I really did put the work in.
Oh,
and then
wow.
what was cool was, the school was right on Hollywood Boulevard and we lived in Hollywood. And so for the first couple of years, we didn't even have cars. We didn't even have beds. We had, air mattresses, but it didn't slow us down a bit.
Right.
But I would walk to school at night with my guitar on my back, and every classroom had a PA and a drum set. And just you just fall in with whoever. And so I put a band together at school too. And they had a thing called LPW, which was the live performance workshop. And so there was basically a big theater in the center of the school, like a big club, probably seating for maybe 200 or 300. But it was to this day probably the scariest audience ever, because it's just a bunch of your peers, guys literally sitting out there with their guitar on, or drummers waiting to play, And so it was, and of course all the jazzers looked down at the rockers and vice versa.
Exactly.
And so it was kind of intense. But I remember, I think I did something like 56 of those in that one school year.
Wow.
And so it just, put a little bit of hair on my chest, and really, I just was really driven right away. I wanted to do good. I wanted to put on a good performance. I had a great female singer, and we were doing things like Heart, Straight On For You and Barracuda and stuff like that. I was also, even in my most metal-y, I was always kind of still into the arty things, and the Cure and the Morrisseys and the Smiths, and Suzanne Vega was a big record, Solitude Standing.
Oh yeah.
I listened to that quite a bit. I actually got to open for her years later in England, which was cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, it was a really neat and exciting time. My best friend, he joined the metal band Lizzie Borden before the school year was out.
Oh,
and
cool.
So he was off touring, internationally, long before I was. That was his only big band that he got in, but he got to see the world while still a teenager, which was pretty cool.
That's incredible. I mean, and yeah. I know what you mean about going and standing in front of your peers and doing that. I went to school for photography, and we had the same thing. You would do a project and then you'd put up on the wall, and then you'd get critiqued by all your classmates. It's very intimidating.
Yes. And again, everybody in the audience was the best in their town. That's why they moved to LA.
Exactly.
So everybody thought they were the best, and to get that time, you had to be the best and the prettiest and the most fabulous, And so it was kind of intense. But, it's funny. And again, I always have had sort of a crazy standard for myself. And I mentioned, we did Straight On by Heart one time, and we had extra girls who joined us so we could have the 2-part really high harmony. And I thought that it was so bad. I was so hard on myself. I walked off the stage out the front door with my guitar on the whole way home. And, I thought we completely screwed it up, and then the next day I came back to school and everybody was talking about it. And, months later, I actually saw the video. I'm like, oh, it's actually pretty good. But in the moment, I thought I was terrible. I was just really kind of hard on myself. But, I just think that was just the beginning of having a really high standard and wanting to do good and sort of associating, again, my thing has always been, I never got in it to be famous. I just wanted to be a great artist, and that stays true to this day. And so, after school, I was in that instrumental band, and then I was playing at the Coconut Teaser, which was a famous old club on Sunset Boulevard, and we were literally opening for Body Count, which is that's Ice-T's band, yeah. And I it was with my instrumental band, and in came Richie Podler and his partner Bill Cooper. And Rich was a really famous producer. Some of his biggest claim to fame is being like Three Dog Night, all their hits, and like Born to Be Wild with Steppenwolf and stuff. And so he had heard good things about me, and he was coming to check me out. And so he invited me to come into the studio and like put guitar solos on records he was producing. And so I ended up being in a band that he was producing for some years called Young Art. And we were sort of like a Mellencamp-y, REO Speedwagon-y, like with a, piano/acoustic front guy and big guitars. Okay. And so we had a good run on the West Coast, and we did also, some of the guys were from the Midwest, so we toured in the Midwest. And then over the years, I started, writing songs, backup singing and stuff. And then eventually, kind of usurped the singer, brought in a couple of my guys. And then I had the first band that I ever fronted called Damone. And we were more like U2 meets Led Zeppelin, very guitar driven, very powerful, but songy. And that was my first like band that I ever fronted. Yeah. So
were you singing before Damone? I mean, was that something that you had wanted to do early on at all?
Yeah. Again, I was singing backups, but the thing was, again, my control freak side was emerging, and as I was writing songs, I felt like the singer wasn't singing my songs right. He's a great singer, but he would just, my song, the intent of my songs was getting lost on him, and so I became sort of frustrated with that. At that same time, this is in my late 20s, I started working for Giant Records for Irving Azoff's label. And then I had a woman there, a Buddhist friend, and she knew that I was trying to grow a pair and step out front and be a singer. And so, I became a Buddhist. That's been, 27 years ago.
Wow.
And so that sort of helped really center me and make me very determined. And so, I fronted that band, and we did really well. I met my wife with that band and stuff, and we toured regionally. And then when that band was about ready to implode, I was approached by an attorney who represented a band called Damone that was signing to RCA. And even though we didn't have a copyright or anything, we had toured regionally, we'd released records, we had some TV licensing. And so they basically wanted to buy our name. And, I was working for Irving at the time. And so I asked for his counsel. And so basically dragged it out over months, and, we got 5 figures, and that we split it 4 ways, but that was basically the seed money to start my solo career. I bought gear. I bought my first Pro Tools rig. I bought these Genelec monitors that I still have and a couple of microphones.
Oh, nice.
And then, I self-produced my first EP.
Storm is a-brewing on the outskirts of town. Hear the rain and the thunder gonna take our party down. Don't you worry about it, there is nothing you can do. It's gonna seek out all the sinners for the sinning that we do.
And then, in 2005, I released my first solo album. And then in 2005, I went to Europe for the first time. And so this year makes my 20th anniversary going overseas.
Oh, that's amazing.
And yeah.
So when you were working with Irving Azoff, so you weren't stepping away from music at that time. You were still working on it.
Absolutely. And that whole, that gig, again, I worked for the record company first. I was the assistant to the CFO, Larry Silver, who was like the quintessential sort of like Kevin Spacey Swimming with Sharks executive that was just cruel and unusual to his assistant. Oh. And again, I'm a rock and roller, and finance is not my wheelhouse, but my best friend Corey was the assistant to head of A&R, and he got me the gig. Okay. And so that was a very, very stressful job that I absolutely detested. And I was in the center of the music business, but I hated the job. And so one day I just quit just because it was just too much stress. And the next day they invited me to come back because they liked me. And then I worked for Irving's office. So I was like his third assistant. Sometimes I worked in the mailroom, things like that. And after a few years, Giant had broken Disturbed. We had Steely Dan, 2 Against Nature, won Album of the Year Grammy, which was a bit of an upset at the time.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And so Irving promptly sold the label to Warner Brothers, let everybody go. I got a severance check, which yielded my engagement record to the wife, and engagement ring to the wife. And then I got to come back to work the next day for the management company, which ended up being Azoff Music Management, or Frontline over the years. And so I ended up, again, I was his third assistant, or mailroom, or what I call pack mule to the stars. And so I was basically the liaison between he and the artists. So for, the whole Azoff period of my life was about 10 years. But because I was working for the boss, I had unbelievable access to icons all the time. We had the Eagles. Obviously, he's worked for the Eagles forever and ever. Right. But the Christinas and the Seals and the Gavins and the Gwens and everybody from like Henry Winkler to Penny Marshall was a friend. So if it was Christmas deliveries or what, I had alone time with Brian Wilson at his home. I had alone time with Joni at her home. Yeah, a lot of amazing things. And he was part owner of, Staples and Irvine Meadows and things. And so there was like maybe a block of maybe 10 or 15 tickets, dead center, 10th row or something, to every single concert. So if they weren't being used, I often got to go. Wow. And so, that whole time, even though I was sort of an underling at the company, I just had all the access. But, that was a circuitous way to answer your question. But all that time I was in Des Moines. And so, we also had an account at Tower Records. So, get a couple for the office, couple for me. Right. Make flyers in the copy room for the shows. Go look at guitars while I'm making a delivery to Christina's house or whatever. So I was never the world's best employee because I was always laser focused on my stuff. Okay. But through that, again, I got to know Seal, I got to know Jewel. And, Jewel was her manager was always a champion of mine, Tompkins Solo. And so I got a one-off opening for her in Temecula at Pachanga Casino, which was like a, 1,500 seat showroom.
Oh, cool. And
this is what, by now I'm in my solo mode. And that went really well. And so she asked me out on tour with her. So I did a Southern tour with Jewel. This would have been, again, about 20 years ago. And we were doing like 1,000 to 3,000 seaters. Okay. And that was my first time, really seeing that my songs could go over for total strangers. And it was quite lucrative in that I was selling hundreds of CDs and posters and stuff. And so, I was making thousands in paper as a completely independent artist. And so I always say that was the carrot that, has kept me going all this time. And so I did one tour with her. She was full band. And then she asked me out again. And the second tour, she was solo. And so, we did some bigger rooms, but that was around maybe 3,000 capacity. And that was on the East Coast. And at the same time, that was the year I first went to Europe. And then in 2006, feeling pretty inspired and confident, I made my second record, Stargazer. And then I had Warner Brothers really liked the record, and they had come to see me play. Tom Wally, who's a big dog there. But he came to see me at the Hotel Cafe. And he said something about my banter or something after the show, which I took umbrage with,
Oh, really?
Because I think my banter is a legend. And that was just a really sort of pivotal time in general in the industry where the indies sort of started to emerge. And so at that moment, I'm like, I'm just going to be autonomous. And so I had a new baby, and, my wife's a school teacher, and, as a family, I had gone to the Folk Alliance of San Diego. And that was also a really come to Jesus moment, because I saw these people that a lot of them were pretty poor, but they were really good, really good. And I'm like, I can't do this in my spare time. I have to do the thing. Right. And so with my wife's blessing, I quit my day job with a new child at home. And then, I got a tour with Seal, which was amazing. I did a national tour, I think it was only 11 shows, East Coast to West. And that got me in front of up to 10,000 people. Right, again, solo acoustic, and Seal was very lovely. He's a super sweetheart. Oh, he was with Heidi. He was with Heidi at the time, so that was also fun. She's super cool too.
Oh my gosh, man.
Mm-hmm, I know.
And then with your first EP and LP, you started things off amazingly by having Berlin cover one of your songs.
Yeah, well, that was a couple of years after that. It was a song called "Last Day on Earth" was on my first EP version, and then a full band version on my first record. But yeah, after I'd been going to Europe a couple times, this was actually in 2010. I was doing this thing called the Dutch Writers Camp, and I was with Boema Stemra, which is a Dutch BMI. And they had a contest where they were going to have 10 up and coming Dutch songwriters and 10 VIPs and this crucible of a writer's camp. Of course, I was the lowest on the totem pole of the VIPs. But so we went to Amsterdam. And again, by then I'd been going for 5 years. And I'll never forget, I was at my hotel waiting for a car to pick me up to take me to the studio. And I got a phone call. Is this Shane? Hi, Shane. This is Terry Nunn. And I had met Terry. I actually auditioned for their band once.
Oh, wow.
But Terry called me on the phone, and she said, "Hey, Shane, this is Terry Nunn. I'm interested in covering Last Day on Earth." And I remember saying, "I think that's a great idea." And so, but what was funny is they I don't think they released it, but they did a live version that got released. And, they kind of messed with my lyrics, which I was not happy about. Nobody said anything about that.
Of course not.
It was super flattering. And, again, I grew up with MTV, as a teenager, lusting after Terry on the Metro, Here she is calling me. That was very cool. And, at the same time, I was the low man of the VIPs at that event, but someone on my team actually ended up winning. And so, Holland has been a really big deal for me. I think I've played in 13 or 14 countries, but I've hit Holland and Germany the most. Holland is truly a home away from home. And I have tons of lovely fans and friends in Holland, and it's really, really special to me. So,
that is awesome.
Yeah. And so again, when my second record came out, I started to get a lot of film and TV, which was beautiful. And, in these years subsequently, I've released 8 records now, and, to be full-time in the arts is insane. And to drag a family into it is insane. To not have a steady paycheck for, 19 and a half years is insane. But my thing always is, so much of what I took from the Azov years, I would see that, under Giant and Frontline and stuff, there was also a label called Revolution, which was a smaller indie label that was under Irving as well. And so I would see a lot of these kind of young rock bands come in, and the frivolous spending that got charged to a baby band with their first deal, the $5,000 photo shoots and stuff like that, And so again, my biggest takeaways from all of that time was just I always wanted everything that I do to scan major label to be really of a really high standard. Pictures, posts, albums, art, posters, everything. I want to be as professional as humanly possible, right, but do it in a sustainable and affordable way. So, I've had a battery of, amazing photographers I've clung to for years because they help me with my branding and my visuals. And, again, I've had a number of managers sort of come and go, but at the end of the day, I've been basically self-managed the whole time. And not that I have any idea what I'm doing, but that hasn't stopped me yet, Just keep putting one foot in front of another, and that's kind of been it.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. like you mentioned, you've had some stuff show up on TV and the movies and all, and is that something that it's harder to do as an independent artist? Because isn't that something that your manager would usually handle, right?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, everything in our industry is so insane. You know, I always say there's just a billion ways to skin the cat. Nice. But my thing always is to be very visible, and you know, I'm very active in the Los Angeles scene. I mentioned the Hotel Cafe. You know, I've been playing there basically since their inception. I work it, and again, you know, when MySpace first happened, I hadn't quit my day job yet, but I was already, you know, I started pounding the virtual pavement as soon as it was there, and that's what led me to go to Holland in the first place.
Oh wow!
I had gotten some press on my first record, The Middle Way. And anybody that had written about me, I'd email them, thank you for your kind words. If you have any ideas for booking or distribution in your country, you know. And so my friend Jan Janssen worked at a website, had a website called realrootscafe.com. And he had given me a really good review, and he put me in touch with a Dutch label called Lucky Dice. And it was also very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? I just was really in rhythm, and it was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and they're like, we're going to be in LA this weekend. Oh. And so they came out to my house. My wife made dinner. I played for them, and they bought 300 records from me and took them back to Holland, and they put together my first few tours. And so, you know, I basically figured out how to be entrepreneurial. You know, again, there was no template for it. I didn't have any mentor in it or anything. For better or for worse, but I just did try to keep to a standard. And again, I'm such a music fan, you know, I from MTV, you know, from being little through the MTV years, I have such a kind of diverse kind of background, but I just know a good song when I hear it. And I just try to hold myself to that standard. And, you know, over the years, you know, good things have come. And you know, try to be humble and professional and timely and lovable and fabulous, you know. And then I've had a few, you know, overseas record deals, and you know, my label in Holland around maybe 2015, 16, at their behest, they wanted me to do a masterclass on being an independent artist. Oh, wow. And so I literally wrote the curriculum on a train from Berlin. It was like an all-day train. But I did this class in Holland and Belgium and I think Luxembourg. And it was really successful. And it was called The Songwriter's Guide to Life. And I just talked about kind of every facet of our career, from licensing to writing to like running a band to, you know, endearing yourself to the sound guy, to mental health on the road, to eating and drinking for the voice. And you know, I always boil it down to, you know, don't suck, don't quit, and make friends. And you know, I think one thing that a lot of artists do wrong is to make friends, or, you know, I say team building, okay. You know, particularly, you know, you go into a foreign land with just a guitar, you know, like you can sneak in and sneak out, or you can come out with minions if you like really maximize your time. And so I think just, you know, from whatever my Freudian stuff as a child, like I just have a, you know, desire to make connections. And so that is my superpower, is making connections and maintaining them. And so many of the big benefits that I've had over the years were relationships that I sort of fed and watered for some time. And then just like, oops, somebody throws me a tour, or oops, I got a Chevrolet commercial, you know, things like that. And so in terms of the licensing thing, you know, I had a few agents early on that were great. And I had a few, like one of my best placements was on a show called Bones. And the agent for that
show.
Mm-hmm. That was a really juicy one. And a woman who worked at Fox, hi Elaine, saw me at a show. And so I didn't have an agent commission. That was a nice 5-figure payday. But then over the years, that song has continued to bring in money for years and years. And still, I can be in the middle of nowhere doing a show and someone will come up after. I heard that song on Bones. It was a montage, you know, so I had my whole song at the end of an episode. I had, you know, 3.5 minutes in front of millions of people. So that was even before Shazam, but, you know, sold a ton of downloads, and it just, you know, helped pave the way. And, you know, obviously those kinds of placements do not come every day. over the years, because everybody realized that was the last place there was any money in the industry, a lot of the fees came down because it did get saturated, and people were like paying to get a sync just for the exposure, things like that, So it's cool that it's a level playing field. Obviously, the streaming rates and stuff are not favorable to actually working musicians.
Right.
But, I do think like anything else, you have to show up to work, and I always do. And again, particularly to be completely autonomous, if you don't put something on the board, there's nothing on the board. If you don't find a show or a session or whatever, there is nothing,
right. And it doesn't hurt that you're talented. The music is fantastic. Like I said, I kind of went through a Shane Alexander crash course today, and I was listening to a bunch of this stuff. Obviously, the new album several times between last night and this evening. But nice. What I love, like Stargazer, the song "Ride the Tides," I love that. But I think "Ripe" is my favorite.
Thank you.
In the beginning, the piano against those drums.
To leave it alone would feel much better. It's easier said than done, but still I try. Maybe I should just forget her. She was the ripest of all.
That's the kind of stuff that I love.
Thank you. Yeah, that song, and it's funny. Again, that was my second record. I mentioned it'll add depth. There's an argument to and against telling what the songs are really about, but that song was literally written in a time, again, my mother had left as a child. I saw her once when I was 9. We reconnected in my 30s.
Oh, wow.
Until she passed. But that song is about her. That song is about, I wrote that from a person that wasn't in my life.
Wow.
And and what's also cool is that it was a guitar song. And when we were in the studio, Stargazer is a really special record for me. Shipwrecked got licensed and has done really well for me from that record. But Ripe, again, was a guitar song. That record we recorded in 4 days. I've never topped that ever.
Wow.
I sang the whole record basically in one sitting, but the tracks mostly we got the first day.
Oh my gosh.
But we had done that song, and we were kind of listening to the playback, and my guitar was muted. And I'm like, leave my guitar out. So it just of its own volition became a piano song.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so it's basically piano, drums, and bass and Rhodes. There's this really wonderful, slowly sort of undulating Rhodes. And I remember at the time, I'm like, it's like listening to a massage. Yeah. Like the Rhodes was so dreamy,
Yeah.
And the words were really earnest, It was basically, the little kid talking to his mom out there in the ethers before we had reconnected, so yeah. It's a good grab. And there is a lot of spook in that song, and the drummer is Charlie Paxson, who's done tons of great things, but he was on my record Stargazer and the following record, but so musical, and the drums, particularly in that sound, kind of like a Bernard Purdy, kind of like the 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. It's just a lovely, lovely drum part, and also we recorded at Stag Street with their lovely room sound. That is
one of it's definitely my favorite off Stargazer, but out of everything I've listened to, it still ranks right up there. What I've discovered in listening to what I've been able to listen to so far is that each of your songs, it tells a story. It kind of makes me think of that old Steven Spielberg TV show, Amazing Stories, because each of your albums, like every song is its own episode in that show that actually is an album, and it's a testament to your songwriting, because that's not something I find with a whole lot of people. Every song stands on its own, and they're not frivolous. There's nothing superfluous about the music or the lyrics. Everything seems to have a purpose. It's written deliberately, and everything works together so well.
Thank you. Yeah, I surely try. And yeah, I feel like no word can be wasted. I feel like no music can be wasted, and we hadn't gotten to that part yet, but 10 years ago, I built this studio. And so for the last 10 years, I've self-produced my last 3 albums. But I also produce a lot of other artists. And so again, that just kind of full circle from all of the records I listened to growing up. And still, if I'm not making music, I listen to music all the time. It's still the Whoopee,
Yes.
I'm such a music fan. And again, I like new inspirations and, so many classic things, from Bowie to Moody Blues to, again, Black Sabbath and, on and on and on and on, to current things, War on Drugs, Phoebe Bridgers, Kurt Weill, whatever.
Oh, I love Kurt Weill.
He's amazing. Yeah, I just love artists that are pure in what they do. And, I'm still a humble independent, but I do have fans that have been with me for ages. And, to me, every fan is sacred, and anybody, that's paying money to see my show, I just want to show up. I want to do a good job. And if I'm producing a record or I'm producing my own or somebody else's, it's got my name on the back or the front, and I need to do my best. And doesn't mean, there's no guarantees ever that, records will recoup or, I've been very blessed also that all of my records have recouped over the years, which is that in itself is fairly an anomaly.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I think a lot of it too is just the testament to putting the work and the relationships and showing up and just being in the mix. And, I've been really fortunate with the people that I surround myself with, I have a lot of friends that are bona fide rock stars, and I have a lot of friends that are unknown legendary talents, And, I don't want to compete with anybody. I really, just want to help lift each other up. The scene, the music is really hard is a vocation. But I think, the greats have to figure out a way to make it a vocation, because it's hard to be great in your spare time.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard enough to do it full time, but so again, and I'm, it wasn't like I was a naturally gifted singer or things like this, every sort of gain that I've had, I had to figure out the old fashioned way, but it's just because it's my love. And I, just music really is the great love of my life. Again, the Black Sabbath, the ending of the Back to the Beginning concert was this week. And I'm always saying to my wife and kid, without Black Sabbath, none of this would have happened. I would have never met your mother, it's literally, the guitar has taken me everywhere. I had never heard that John Denver song, This Old Guitar, till, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
But, it really moved me because it's so true. Every cool thing that's happened in my life is, and somehow I can blame it on music, know. And I have so many dear friendships with people all over the planet now. And, the brotherhood and sisterhood of artists, that I'm so proud to call friends. And sometimes, as artists, the only thing that we have is, the respect of artists we respect, to get us through the cold, dark night. Years ago, I played in Ventura, and Corey Withers opened for me, and she's Bill Withers' daughter, and he was at the show.
Oh, okay.
And after her set, he was sitting up front, and I'm like, Mr. Withers, if it's possible, I'd love to have you stay for the show. He goes, I'm not going anywhere. And he sat in the front seat, and I did a 15-song solo show, and he was so kind and encouraging after. He said, you don't get that good unless you love it.
Oh, wow.
And I teared up instantly. And he was just so encouraging. And he said, man, when they found me, I was like, where you been? I've been great forever, And, but it was, again, the things that get you through, Bill Withers thought I was pretty damn good, which was really a beautiful thing. And it's a hard business. And again, it's a business that wants you to second guess your decisions, wants you to second guess your shirt, but at the end of the day, the more you do it, the more I've done it. It's a process of just trying to bring out be the best version of myself I can be. I'm not trying to compare myself to anybody. I don't give a shit what anyone else is doing. I just want to be the best me. And I have a pretty damn high standard. And also at the same time, with producing and mentoring other artists, I love nothing more than to see other people like stand up and do great things and sing their song. You know, like it's beautiful. And in this world where so many things are artificial, or obviously the whole world heard about that virtual band last week, but most of us knew that there's been virtual bands for some years now. But like, you know, while everybody's crying about it, they're sharing the story, giving these guys more clicks, you know. And but I'm a purveyor of the real, and when I produce records, you know, I try to hire real musicians. And I don't want to use a 8-bar piano sample. I can plunk it out myself, or get a really great world-class piano player in here, and he who goes home with money, you know. And so that's really what I try to fight for. And all these, you know, when there's nothing for me as a producer or as an artist, there's nothing more beautiful than being in a room full of kick-ass musicians, and we're just trying to figure out the thing, and then it emerges. Oh my God, there's the groove. There's the thing, you know, it's like a religious moment, you know. It's very special, and it's because everybody comes with diverse tastes and backgrounds and styles, and you put them in the room, and that's where the really cool shit happens, you know. Obviously, now so much music is made in the box and sample-based. Nothing against that, but that's not why I got into it, you know. I want performances. I want soulful, real stuff, you know, and so I really do fight for that.
And that's what I love about your music, because it doesn't sound like it came out of a box. It's got that like, you know, like your influence, like Simon and Garfunkel feel to it, that 60s folk feel to it, you know, especially on particular albums like Mono Solo, which is that album. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. I mean, you've got songs on there that are just, they sound so fragile, I guess is the best word. I mean, like, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Vegeta. Okay. They're just amazing. They kind of remind me of like my favorite Roy Harper, Simon and Garfunkel songs.
Yeah, I'm hip to Roy Harper. Yeah, you know, Carrollton was it's a very honest song that basically, you know, I wanted to wait to release until my mother's parents had moved on, because basically it's the story of my mother and her parents. You know, okay. And it's very literal, but it has some of my favorite lines I ever wrote, but they're quite pointed. You know, the past is dressed in Sunday clothes, in picture frames in dusty rows, and put in rooms where no one goes to see them. You know, it's just like, you know, my mother was like talked about in hushed tones. It's like there's a baby picture on the stairs, but she hasn't been here for decades. You know, It's just like, how else do you process those things but to write about them? You know. Yeah.
The past is dressed in Sunday clothes, in picture frames in dusty rows, and put in rooms where no one goes to see them. And they sing angels forgive.
And so, you know, I don't have any grudges to anybody alive or dead, and my family stuff, for whatever strange or unconventionality it might have had, yielded a very grateful, creative, grounded person, you know, who's also a family guy, you know. So I feel really, really blessed in my life, and I just want to keep the standard high and keep doing what I love with people that I care about, you know.
It comes through in the music, that authenticity, like I mentioned, you know, your solo stuff when it's just you playing on just a guitar or a piano. It's beautiful, but I also love the full band stuff. It kind of reminds me of like the intersection of like, I guess, folk and an alternative, like early 90s kind of folk alternative, like Grantley Buffalo kind of stuff, which
good ear. Yeah. Grant, who I've played shows with.
Oh, wow.
That band, I bring them up a lot because what they meant to me, what I saw them as was particularly, they were like the bridge between grunge and then like the sort of LA hotel cafe singer-songwriting movement.
Yes.
And I saw, Mighty Joe Moon was a really big record for me.
Same
and
here.
then it's funny because I do a lot of falsetto, but I played a couple shows with Grant. I didn't do any falsetto that night, just sort of out of respect. But I had seen them. They played the Avalon in Hollywood. Used to be called something else. And they were a three-piece, and he was playing acoustic through Fender Twins with pedals. And so one of my most successful songs is called Feels Like the End. And I've never even told Grant this, but that's got a big guitar solo in it, but it's a Gibson acoustic through an amp, through pedals. I mic the acoustic, but it's also through a pretty dirty amp with echo and stuff. But I completely purloined that from like the Mockingbird solo.
Yes.
That's an acoustic through an amp. And so I completely bit that from Grant. But what's fun about it is, if you don't reveal it throughout the show, you're just playing acoustic all night. And then oops, on the 10th song, you do a ripping electric guitar solo with the same acoustic guitar. The audience's eyes get big. Like, wait, what's happening? It's
how did that
cool.
happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Grantley Buffalo was huge. When Fuzzy came out, I loved it, but Mighty Joe Moon was just incredible. And I was lucky enough to see him on the Copperopolis tour when 16 Horsepower was opening up. That was just a killer show. But you mentioned, doing bands that influenced you like Moody Blues, and you do an incredible cover of Nights in White Satin. It's wonderful.
Thanks.
Gazing at people, some hand in hand. Just what I'm going through, they can't understand. Some try to tell me thoughts they cannot defend.
Have you done any Black Sabbath covers?
It's funny you should ask, because we were just talking about that the other day. I've just done Planet Caravan. Planet Caravan is one of my favorite things ever.
Oh yeah.
It's one of the most vibey recordings in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
In Des Moines, we would use Sabbath riffs as like segues.
Oh, cool.
Like fairies wear boots. Yeah, a couple of those have worked their way in, but I haven't covered any. But yeah, lately going to the gym, I've been listening to a lot of like heavy rock. And I was telling my wife, I'm always a little ahead of the curve. This past weekend, obviously, metal had its biggest moment in like 30 years.
Yeah.
And, of course, I knew about it early. And, of course, I said to the wife, I apologize in advance, but, like, our house is going to be rocking all day. I'm listening to Mastodon in the living room with, the speakers cranking at 7 a.m. I had friends come over later in the day, but it was really special. But, yeah, that music is never far. But for me, again, initially when I came to town, I was, trying to be a hotshot lead guitar player. And I did some cool stuff for sure. Then when I went full acoustic, people that knew me back in the day are like, yeah, this is great, but when are you going to rock? When are you going to play electric guitar again? And I just haven't really felt it in my music. Another person we haven't spoken about yet who's really important is Neil Young, who for me truly is kind of like the zenith of all things. Yeah. All things pure, Yeah. And so again, when I came to Hollywood that first or second year, I saw him at the Greek. And he was solo acoustic, and Keep On Rockin' in the Free World was a new song. And even acoustic, like that song just leveled, it was him solo acoustic versus 9,000 people. And I'd never seen I cried. And it was just very life-changing. And I actually got to meet Neil last year, and I told him, and he was very sweet, I heard he can be surly or whatever over the years, but I was so happy to meet him, and he was so lovely. And I just said, man, I got to tell you, I said, I saw you solo at the Greek, and it just changed my whole TNA, and I did the whole country with Styx and Yes in 2011, and our last show was at the Greek, and I was solo acoustic at the Greek, and I told the story on stage. I'm like, right where you're sitting, way up there, like I saw Neil, and it was I just witnessed like the power of the vulnerability and the nakedness of one person versus a crowd that big. If you can wrangle them in, it's amazing. And again, as an independent, it's definitely more cost effective. I love making full band records. And again, I just had a record release show in Malibu a month or so ago that was wonderful. And my last couple songs, I had 9 people on stage. And that was awesome, but I just can't, it's not logistically feasible for me, particularly because I want to be surrounded by great musicians. My goal is always for me to be the worst musician on stage, but yeah, between the Jewel stuff, and again, I opened for Suzanne Vega in England, and just seeing a lot of really wonderful solo performers, from in front of and behind the stage and everything, to really just see what that's like. It's been really lovely. And again, the Styx and Yes tour was the biggest thing I've done. And in that, my biggest audiences in that were north of 20,000 people.
Wow.
And I wasn't getting all singer-songwriter. Yeah, I was doing like the one-man rock show.
Nice.
But it's so exhilarating and gratifying. And so, as an independent, I've been fortunate. Every once in a while, the universe throws me these big bones, and I'm always determined to make the most out of them and make my presence felt, and so
you're working hard for it though. You're getting back what you're putting out.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I just think, I never begrudge my career for what it's not, that's also out of my Buddhist practice, but like, I my life's very abundant. I don't want for anything, I have too many guitars. I have, I have a lovely family. I have a lot of good stuff in my life. And I think the only way for me to rationalize it is to be a good person and a strong artist, and really, just try to be a force of good in the world. And, talking about Neil, talking about Cat Stevens, both of them are so a part of what I do. And to this day, Cat Stevens uses his socials and whatever for social awareness. And, he's got such beauty behind his music and his persona and all that. And, some of my most successful songs have been really dark, Shipwrecked and Feels Like the End and stuff. I don't shy away from the real, but I do try to put a lot of beauty out there and try to like reach out and cross barriers and not exclude anybody and stuff. And these are very challenging and divisive times. And it's very hard to pick your battles of when to speak and when not to speak. Right. I'm always, what would Neil do? What would Dylan do in this moment? What would Bruce do? I mean, obviously Bruce has been, a really important artist as well, and using the microphone to like really make people, look at themselves, look at their environment, and I think that's really valid. I forget what his name is, but he's a pretty well-known young kind of country singer-songwriter. And he had posted a video a few weeks ago, and he was saying how people are always saying, just stick to the songs and don't talk about what's going on all the time. And he was saying how we as artists are probably more qualified to do so than any, because we do travel all over the place. We've been all over the country. We've been outside the country. We can go to the poshest party in the city and it'd be at the most country barbecue you ever went to. So we really do get an aerial view of, the whole thing. And we're not just sitting in our hometowns, watching one news channel all the time, so.
And great art isn't made in a vacuum.
Of course. And I have the luxury of going in and out. Again, my mother's family in Missouri, very small town, very, very small town. My father's, my grandparents in Pennsylvania, also quite small town, and so, that all feeds into it. But, coming to the city, for me, and like seeing diversity, I feel safer amongst diversity than I do in places that aren't diverse, and for me, like Los Angeles, New York City, and Amsterdam are just my 2 favorite things. And I think a big part of it, what I find so intoxicating, is the diversity. It's just breathtaking. Walk through Central Park, you'll see every color of the rainbow, people from burqas to hip hoppers to, you know, Asian tourists with everybody's got a camera. What, you know, it's just like, it's like a schools of fish from people all over the planet, just going about their day, totally being cool. And that's sort of my utopian version of society, you know?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, you know, some of the darker songs. One of the things I really thought was wonderful, actually, is the new album, Forever Songs. It feels very positive and uplifting. Is that something that was on purposefully done, or is it just where you were when you were writing and recording those songs?
Yeah, well, again, I appreciate you like noticing and getting in there. Yeah, it is relatively a hopeful record. Coming into that time, you know, obviously without getting too political, you know, just in the last 8-9 years, you know, with the first time around with our current administration, I was worried. I was troubled by it, you know. Okay. And then we got into the pandemic and stuff. You know, things were a little scary, you know, to be a professional artist. How do we do it? How do we survive? And then kind of halfway through 2020, I just sort of felt like I molted to another level of like gratitude. And so, like, for example, the song Love Finds a Way, I wrote that, you know, like walking my dog around this, you know, my neighborhood.
But when you touch me, you make me mountain high. You're the one thing keeping me alive. Love finds a way in the land of forgiving. Love finds a way.
And then at the same time, you know, Autumn Blue is a darker one. But it's kind of defiant because I remember specifically, I wrote that in the fall of 2020, and I'm like, this is the ugliest period in time of my life. I have to document it, you know? Right. And but yeah, the idea was, you know, it won't be swallowed by the undertow. Like, this is designed to make us fearful and loathing and whatever. And I'm like, I just kind of found my mojo.
Everyone must choose their side. Autumn blue. Found me, autumn blue. The old ways are gone. Dying on the couch, watching the world go insane. You know there ain't no place like home. And all these emotions play from dusk till dawn. No, I won't let go, won't be swallowed by the
again. And I'm like, I'm not going to be sucked into it, you know? Yeah. And so I've defiantly held on to that ever since. Of course, I'm aware of everything that's going on as everybody else is, but I don't watch the news on television. I have not since Biden's inauguration. I think it was the last day I watched proper news on TV.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it just doesn't feed me in any way.
It's probably healthier.
Oh, of course it's healthier, dude. You know, like, I think so many people that are glued to, they're like, feel like they're watching the fuse burn down. They're desperate and they're making all of these assumptions and decisions based on pure fear, right, and, you know, biblical rationale and this and that. And it's like, yeah, as soon as you turn off the television, you go outside, like, the sun's shining, my dog's amazing. Yep. Like, I live in California, there's a palm tree, like, people are sweet on the street. Like, a lot of that is just by design to, like, make everybody, you know, lose their minds. And so
I agree, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so again, like, Higher Than High also is like a love song, you know, about just sort of coming through, you know, a heavy time and finding your legs again.
If I could find your peace of mind, if you could leave it all behind, we'd finally get your heart feeling free. Higher than high, higher than high, higher than high.
You know, and that song, again, talking about the guitar thing, you know, I produced Senja Sargent, an amazing artist from Holland, and that was kind of an early 80s kind of rock record. And I played a lot of electric guitar on that, and that kind of fired me up again about playing electric guitar. So the new record, songs like Autumn Blue, Higher Than High, and a couple others, like I really did return to the electric guitar in a big way. So Higher Than High, I buried it, made it last song of the record because it's, it's pushing 6 minutes. Like it's like one for me. But of course, so many people have told me that was their favorite of the record,
That, and you mentioned my two favorite, it's Higher Than High and Autumn Blue are my two favorites on the album.
Thanks. Yeah, and I like You Make Your Own Luck a lot too. I'm really happy with that one. But yeah, I those are two of my favorites, and and those are songs, Autumn Blue and Higher Than High, that I didn't co-write or anything. They're just all sort of my sort of vision and stuff, and I really feel like I captured what I was shooting for production wise and stuff.
Do you do a lot of co-writes?
Yeah, my first couple of records, I didn't do any. I was adamant. I'm like, Neil Young doesn't co-write, But yeah, by mono solo, I had a fair amount.
Okay.
But now I write for other people. And, another thing coming out of the pandemic in 2020 into 2021, when nothing was happening, my good friend Ted Russell Camp, I've written a bunch of songs with and for him over the years, but he reached out to write remotely. He was the first one to want to write remotely. And again, we'd spent great expense and effort to build my studio. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to do anything remotely. I built this beautiful space, but of course these were extenuating circumstances. Right. And so we wrote, literally I had my phone on a music stand for the first co-write, and then we moved it to Zoom when Zoom was just the birth of Zoom.
Yeah.
And as I always say, nobody died. And so we started to write every Thursday. And then my kid was in middle school, and she was on Zoom classes. She was done at 11 in the morning. And so I just hung out with my kid. I read 25 books.
Wow.
But then I started to I just filled my calendar with Zoom sessions. And so for a long months and months, I had 5 a week. I would be on Zoom at 10 a.m.
Wow.
writing with people all around the world. And so I ended up writing, I think, 85 songs remotely. And the only impetus was, I have friends from their 20s to their 80s that are artists. And is to find us to come up with a song that stands up with one instrument and a vocal, and to leave them better than I found them, because we were on Zoom,
Right,
and
right.
they were all glum and scared or sick or broke or all the above. And so that was just a very pure sort of intention of everybody feels better with a new tune. And obviously you catch up for an hour, but usually, I over time I started to really get my thing together where, basically we would talk for the first hour. We'd be shooting the shit, but I'm taking notes. They put a little story happened here, or a cool city name or whatever. And so I already had notes going in, and then we'd get down to it. Sometimes we might have a kernel of an idea, but more often than not, we were going from a blank page. And so I always say through that exercise, buds started to come back on the tree. I produced some of those artists. I ended up doing shows with some of those artists. Cool. Senya, who I mentioned, I went to Holland and helped her birth of the record with a big record release in Amsterdam and stuff. And, it was just a really good exercise. And, again, I've co-written for a long time, and I mentioned the Writers' Camp in Holland back then. But initially, I always thought, it would sort of dilute the thing. I think it is interesting that my most successful songs are songs that aren't co-writes historically.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter to me. I have a song called I Will Die Alone that I wrote with Jesse Peo, and that's sort of an evergreen song for both of us. And I am not precious about that one bit. I just want to write the best songs I can, and basically having babies with people all over the place. And you can write a song with someone on Zoom and then not see them for 5 years, but we're always going to be tight because we had that baby together.
Exactly.
And so I can't find any downside to it. And I've been with Warner Chappell in Europe for about 15 years, and so they send people to me to write with, and then they pitch things also for us for film and TV. And so if I have a song on somebody else's record that I co-wrote, all of my team and stuff is still vested to pitch it.
Yeah.
So it's all good. I just want to keep making quality work and doing the best I can.
Well, I love Forever Songs. It's an amazing album.
Thank you.
Are you still going out on the road a lot and touring?
Yeah, a little less right at this moment. I've got some, I was up in Northern California a couple weeks ago. I'm going to be back up in Northern California next month.
Okay.
I've got like 5 Southern California shows this month. I usually do the East Coast every fall. I usually go to Europe every fall. This year, I have tons of friends that are touring internationally even as we speak.
Yeah.
Just as a family guy with a little bit of separation anxiety and all of the weirdness of the moment, I'm a little more reticent than usual. But again, it is important to me because it is my 20th anniversary going to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So I'll probably sneak over at the end of the year. I'll do my regular East Coast tour in the fall. I usually get up to Seattle, do West Coast stuff end of summer, and here and there. But I'm not as traveling as much as normal right now.
Okay.
I'm producing a couple of artists even as we speak, and kind of in development with another project as well. And just, it's always just trying to, diversify and do things that feel good. And I've got some, big show in Venice coming up in a couple of weeks. And that's sort of my next big focus is that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you get to hit that East Coast tour, I'm hoping you can you get to DC area because I would love to catch a show. Nice,
thank you. Yeah, so DC. I'm trying to think. There was a place called Iota that I played a few times. There's a place, I got to play Merriweather Post Pavilion.
Oh, nice.
Which was very dreamy.
Yeah.
That was on the SEAL tour. I got to play there. I've played a lot of places, but that is a very beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah, I do a lot of concert photography in the area. I haven't had a chance to go. I've seen shots from there, but I've never had a chance to go and shoot from there. So hopefully one of these days.
It's dreamy, man. It's a huge property, very woodsy. The backstage is, I had a few friends that came to see me, and of course they had passes and stuff, but the backstage was so beautiful, so rustic. Big, huge screened in like cafeteria backstage. And then there's basically a bridge out to an island with a pavilion on it. And they have massage tables back there for the backstage for the artists, And so one of my best friends is out there getting a rub. And I came outside as he's coming in and they were like, have a good show. He's like, thanks. But, like the food trucks and the vendors and the woodsy, and there's water, there's a lake or something. It's magnificent.
Oh,
and, I think famously that's where like Running on Empty was recorded, the live version, Jackson Browne.
Oh, cool.
But that's a proper utopian shed situation. Really, really special. Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome. And so I did hear that you're already working on your next album.
Yeah, it's written. I'm going to try to put it down. And to your point, like all of my records for the most part are pretty full bandy. I always throw in a couple of really stripped things in there. But this one, my wife's been asking me forever, and I tour so much solo acoustic. I'm going to try to have this be very, very honest, very, very stripped, probably recorded live. And, I have a lot of songs kind of stockpiled, but I want songs that are very, very potent in their most stripped form, like a Bob Marley redemption songs, right? It's just couldn't be more Spartan, but it's just so grand in its messaging and stuff. And so I have a lot of those where, I might have like a piano accompaniment or a girl singer on something, but I want to keep it really naked. And, for me, a lot of my songs that have been the most successful, my song Skyway Drive-In, I recorded that with one microphone.
Oh, wow.
And that one did really well for me. Spotify actually, for whatever reason, the gods of Spotify deemed me worthy and playlisted the hell out of that one. And that really has done well for me. But it's
awesome.
Fun for me. That song is also very, very honest. It's about, growing up in Pennsylvania and moving to California. It's just sort of about the story of my life. Yeah. But it ended up really cranking. But it's just fun because it's been my biggest success, and it's absolutely no frills. We put a lap steel solo on it, but my guitar and vocal are a take with one microphone.
Skyway driving by your grandma's house used to be all they talked about. It It's been gone such a long time now. Whatever happened to Tanglewood, where our first dance made us feel so good, aching my chest when I...
It's not, not some big expensive recording.
Well,
so,
maybe that honesty is what connects with people.
Yeah, and again, that's 99, 80 to 90% of what I do is solo acoustic, even in big spaces.
Yeah.
And that's how I've been able to afford my life. And so kind of just getting back to like, what is my main bread and butter? Again, as a writer, as an arranger, as a producer, I love to dress up my songs. And if again, Higher Than High is a perfect example. I heard that before, when I was writing it solo acoustic, I heard even with the saxophone at the end, I heard the whole thing before it existed in the world. And then when I finally heard it and it was here, I was really emotional, because I think like when those happen to me, it really does feel like a gift, because it's like someone puts a cassette in my head and I'm trying to recreate the thing that somebody already gave me, And so like with Higher Than High, my friend Tommy Schneller did the saxophone. And, when I got that part, that was the last piece of the puzzle. And when it came in, I'm like, holy hell, there it is. A lot of my dad's, like Jeff Beck Group or Traffic, Crosby, they're all kind of baked into that song,
Yeah, and, I can hear that for sure.
Yeah. And again, it's just through osmosis. It wasn't like I was shooting for it. It was just like, this is the song. And like I was saying before, now I'm, 8 records into my career. I'm giving 0 Fs. I'm just trusting the muse. I don't give a shit what genre or whatever, what box you want to put me in. I'm just trying to be the best me. And so if I do it big, I'll go big. If I want to go small, I'll go small. That's why for a long time, I didn't like my bio to have the term singer-songwriter, because I always thought that sounded like a little small bin at the record store, but then you think of your John Lennons and Bowies. I just think of them as solo artists that are free to explore the cabin. And that's how I like to roll. I just want to create, and I don't want to think about the whys. I just only the thing,
Yeah. And I love that attitude. I love that approach to everything. And I could probably sit here and talk to you for hours.
My pleasure. Yeah.
It's been amazing. So, but where can people find your music and help support you and follow you and find you on tours, like social media or? Yeah,
all the things. Basically, Shane Alexander Music is a good place to start. That's my website. That's also my Instagram handle and Facebook handle, and I'm on all of your streaming sites. I have a beautiful vinyl of my new record. I have vinyl of my last few. A couple are sold out, but grab a physical, stream a digital, add me to your favorite whatever. And, particularly for independents, like we run on the fans, and I'm so grateful that a lot of fans really do show up and put the work in to, ring the bell or make things happen in whatever way feels good to them. But, it takes a village. And, I like I said, I am going to make another record here pretty quick and just keep it going. But my new record is still relatively new, so we'll still be working that for the foreseeable. But yeah, I'm easy to find. Shane Alexander Music. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me this evening. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
Sometimes the simplest song can ease my mind. Bring me to the moment and leave the past behind, where the future's waiting just like smoke upon the sea, soaring like angels to me. Sometimes the truthful word's the only thing that can take a sorrow and give it a pair of wings, like a silver cloud that can shine so bright. It can drive the darkness from your life.